Thank you very much. Is this too loud? No. Okay. I have a tendency to speak very loud, so if I get loud, let me know. As Leah said, my name's Kristyn Watts. I'm the Park Superintendent, Powhatan Historic State Park, and I'm here to talk to you about the effects of the home demonstration clubs on the women of Lawrence County from the years of 1920 to 1940. Tell you a little bit about me. This is my park. This is Powhatan Historic State Park. We are located in Lawrence County, and I'll show you where that is in a minute. But Powhatan actually exists of 6 historic structures. We're an old steamboat town on the Black River. And of the 6 structures, there's the 1889 school, the 1875 Methodist Church, the mid-19th century, we haven't nailed the date down yet, on the log house. Down below is about the 1887 brick commercial structure, though that may change in recent research. We have a new theory, it may be a little bit older than that. And our 1888 courthouse. But what really is important is this building, the stone building down here on the bottom, and that's our 1873 jail. And that's actually what started this whole project. I was researching into the uses of these buildings, and the jail had many uses. It was a jail up until the 1920s, and then afterwards it was used as a canning kitchen, a automotive repair shop, possibly a movie theater at one point, and a honey processing plant. So trying to nail down dates in this, I got into the whole researching, and I stumbled upon the home demonstration clubs of Lawrence County. And it really sparked my interest, and I actually ended up going down to the National Archives in Fort Worth, Texas, where I scanned the Lawrence County, both extension agent and home demonstration agent reports for Lawrence County from 1920 to 1940, and they're over there in the gigantically huge binder on the table. And afterwards, you're welcome to come up and look at them. I also have them digitally too, so we can look at pictures if you want to do that, depending on our time. I'm open to anything. So let's go back in time to life in Arkansas in the 1920s. At this point, this was the first year that the United States Census had shown that the urban populations were actually outnumbered by the urban populations outnumbered the rural populations for the first time in the nation's history. So more people were starting to live in cities, whether through immigration was a big factor, and also due to what was going on in the environment and the economy at the time. Roy V. Scott, who's the professor emeritus of history at Mississippi State University, wrote in his book, The Reluctant Farmer, The Rise of Agricultural Extension to 1914, he described the landscape as agricultural methods were poor, characterized by one-horse farming, shallow plowing, inadequate seed bed preparation, dwindling humus content, and a defective drainage. The soil lacked moisture retention qualities desirable during droughts, and it washed badly after heavy rains. And you can see it in some of the pictures, just how dry and dusty. You know, they were using brooms to sweep up straw. So the conditions weren't the best. Every year, farmers would gamble their crops. They would put money, they would borrow money against the upcoming fall harvest to get the money to buy the seed for the spring planting. And so between the years of 1929 and 1933, the national income per capita fell by 1/3. There was 1 out of 5 people were out of work, about 20% of unemployment. So to narrow in a little bit, this is Lawrence County, the red blob, are way up there in the northeast. We're about 40 minutes west of Jonesboro, if anyone's been up there. And Lawrence County is actually divided in half by the Black River. And the Black River runs, it's a squiggly line, pretty much right through the center of the county. On the east side, you have the flat Mississippi Delta, where we like to say you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. And on the west side, you have the Ozark Plateaus, where you start getting into the hills. On the east side, the type of people living there, and still living there today, you have the descendants of the sharecroppers. And then on the west side, again, you have what was considered the hillbillies of the plateaus. The plateaus consisted of slopes unsuited to intensive row cropping agriculture, and caused the farming to focus either on subsistence farming or on livestock, raising livestock, because you couldn't get the fields flat enough to get the big row crops in there. Where on the east side with the delta, you had that rich gumbo soil, but they was historically planted in a one crop system of cotton. And that itself comes into play later on. I'll talk about that. But the families were it was farmed either by families on small tracts of land or as sharecroppers on larger former plantations. So the population of Lawrence County emigrated, if you know the history of Arkansas, it emigrated from through Tennessee and down through Missouri. They are from the Appalachian Mountains. And so the thing important here is by the beginning of the 20th century, most of the farmers, Lawrence County was pretty much all rural, and the farmers then were on the lower end of the economic scale, probably the poorest in the nation. Okay, this gives you an example of what it was on the west side, and then the flatlands on the east side of the river. So a little history of the Extension Service and the historic, the home demonstration clubs. They were developed by the government to teach farmers the efficient modern agricultural techniques to help increase yield crops and also help increase incomes. The women's division with the home demonstration clubs, they brought change through practical object lessons that illustrated the best and most profitable methods of production. They wanted their families under their care to have a greater economic return for their toil. Both of these movements, this whole movement actually came from the agricultural and mechanical movements of the 1870s. It was built upon by the progressive movements of the early 20th century, and then focused by the needs of the Great War, World War I, and then it was forced by necessity of survival for the next 20 years during the economic depression. So it was sort of honed. It began and honed. So the chief crop at this time in Arkansas and a lot through the South was cotton. Hundreds of years of single crop system. The soil only had the same plant planted in it, became nutrient deficient, it was worn out, and actually the A&M schools, the agricultural mechanical schools, were aware of this. They were aware that the environment couldn't handle the single crop, and they started trying to educate farmers on, look, we got to start rotating crops. We got to start getting nitrates back in the soil. It's not healthy enough to work. But they weren't listening. And it took the migration of one little bug to sort of bring that to bear, and it was the boll weevil. And the boll weevil started coming up through Texas. It actually went through Texas, the earliest was 1892, and after about 10 years it had decimated Texas and all the farms across there. Because of this decimation, in 1902, the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, gave money to this man, this is Dr. Seaman A. Knapp, to start, he actually at the time, he was a former stock farmer, and he was the professor of agriculture and president of the Iowa Agricultural College. And what he started doing is he started giving demonstration farms. He was sent down to Texas to show, look, he'd take a farmer and he'd convince him, give me about 5 acres of your farm, 5-10 acres. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with the seed, I'm going to provide you with the fertilizer, I'm going to provide you with what you need. All you need to do is follow my rules, follow my instructions, keep a good record of it, and we'll look at who has the better yield. He knew that by getting to these farmers, you'd actually have to show them what works. Sitting here talking to him, lecturing them, you weren't going to get anywhere. So the farmers would agree. They would raise the cotton, on their 5 or 10 acre lots. They'd keep their records, and lo and behold, at the end of the season, they were harvesting a much greater yield out of Knapp's demonstration areas, plots, than they were out of their own farms. And so slowly, word of mouth spread. Hey, I'm actually learning something from this here. Let's get my neighbors in. Let's get the environment, because we're boosting the economy. We're learning more, and we're learning more. So these worked, 5 to 20 acres. He also talked about crop rotation and bringing nutrients. He was able to show, if you plant cotton this year and you bring nitrates back in by soybeans the next year, you're going to get a better yield in it. So this was about 1902. 1906, you had work began in Mississippi and Virginia, and then by 1907, it spread to Alabama, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So the Extension Service began, at least on the male side, began in Arkansas in 1907. By 1912, there were 36 agents in Arkansas, And also that year is when we started seeing the beginnings of the home demonstration clubs. The women were going, wait, I want some, I want in on some of this. I want some help. And actually what happened, they saw, in 1912, $1,500 was appropriated by the USDA to help start the home demonstration clubs and the women. And they saw actually with North Carolina, the easiest way to get women involved in this was to go through the kids. And so the 10 counties were selected for full-time agents for the summer and part-time in the spring and fall. And their job was to start tomato clubs or corn and pig clubs for the boys, tomato clubs for the girls, to get them involved in starting to raise money and supplement incomes. And by mothers bringing their daughters to the meetings and getting involved with helping their daughters out, the women were like, well, we want to learn some of this. And so it sort of spread into getting the women involved. So actually, 1913, the Arkansas State Legislature, they gave quorum courts the power to appropriate funds to help offset and to help, in addition to the USDA money, to have their own county agents. And by 1914, that's when we started seeing the first true home demonstration clubs here in Arkansas. And the first one was in Mablevale, in Pulaski. And so I actually have one of the books on the table over there is the history of home demonstration work in Arkansas, if anyone's interested in looking at it. For Lawrence County, we came a little bit later. We had Katie Scott came in 1918 during World War I for a couple months in the summer to teach some canning to help with the war effort, to help get preserve food. But sort of died off, and we didn't come back until 1923. And in 1923, C.C. Randall, who was the extension agent at the time, he helped a campaign to get the first female agent who was assigned in 1924. And they provided financial and moral support from the Lawrence County Agricultural Development Committee, the County Teachers Association, the County Superintendent of Education, Walnut Ridge Chamber of Commerce, and banks. I mean, he just got everybody. And Odessa Pierce started in August 1st of 1923, and then spent the next 4 months just telling about what happened, what was going on. So some of the effects of the home demonstration club. The first one is nutrition. So back up and rewind a little bit. In the mid-1890s, the Department of Agriculture, their Office of Experiment Stations, they just began coordinating and publishing research related to nutrition and food habits. In 1894, Wilbur Olin Atwater, he was the first director of the experiment stations. He provided a foundation for the first food guide that connected food's composition and dietary intake with the health. Pretty much came up with the first dietary plan at that time. And so that's what a lot of the home demonstration movement was based on some of that work out of the USDA. So in 1913, vegetable cookery appeared in the girls' clubs, canning clubs in their repertoire in the meetings. And it naturally carried on to the women's clubs. The goal was to show the nutritional values of each food and how they helped to prevent diseases, because you still had deficiency diseases that was coming through the area. So the classes taught members how to make fresh breads from whole wheat, cheeses, other types of food to balance out their diets, recommended diets for high and low blood pressure, diabetes, malnutrition, cold prevention, pellagra, that was a huge disease that was going through, rickets, anemia, and correcting constipation. So these bulletins were handed out to these women to try to fix some of these. Excuse me. So in Lawrence County, the efforts began right away in 1924 with Odessa Pierce. And she wrote in her narrative that the women need especially good preparation, nutrition, sanitation, home gardening, and canning. She realized that the jobs of the home demonstration club was expand. It had to expand. It couldn't just be one. It couldn't be just canning. It couldn't be just nutrition. It had to expand across. And what she did is she had club members record the foods that they consumed. during the week, and as part of the program, just to increase their dietary awareness. The results were then scored against the different food types that were recommended by the department, the USDA, for consumption. So some of the common problems, though, that they ran into was the idea of convincing these women that more than one type of vegetable is okay to eat. There is more to eat than just cream corn. And that's in there they said, 1926, Myrtle Ann Leach, who's another agent, she wrote that nutrition work is hard to put across. The women know so little about food values and don't seem to care. Many of my clubs act as if they needed a French chef instead of a home demonstration agent. It takes time and diplomacy to get the important facts of nutrition before them. So they slow inertia. This is something that you're dealing with rural poor, a society that's pretty much been in one rut for, hundreds of years. And so now you're trying to get this shift. And a lot of these women had some college education or some college education. And so if you've ever been new to any of small communities, sometimes that can be hard to get into and hard to show. And you can really read it when you read some of these early reports. You can really see that. But one of the ways they had to answer this problem is that they started giving contests. And with contests, you get prizes, and everybody likes prizes. So in 1930, they had the Feeding the Family contest. 41 women from 10 clubs entered. Scorecards were kept by each member of the family recording what they ate. And the contest was actually won on the county level by Miss Jessie Wasson of Smithville, who received $5. Which was big. 1930, $5 is a big thing. So the agent that year, Gladys Waters, she writes up some of the other results, and here are two of them. Says, Mrs. C.C. Ball's 10-year-old boy would never drink milk. When his mother entered the contest and he began keeping a scorecard, he saw the need to drink milk to bring up a score. By this manner, he developed the habit of drinking milk. So it works, shows works. Mrs. Henry Bragg of Ravenden had a 4-year-old girl who was keeping her records. She was in the bank with her daddy one day when a friend came in and wanted to take her to the grocery store and buy her some candy. She said, no, Mama is in the Feeding the Family contest and I can't eat candy. So it shows that it's working. So by 1932, meal planning and food preparation was a permanent phase. They realized that it was working. So it was a good part of the program. The Better Baby program is another one that came out with nutrition because they saw that these kids, along with food, there was other ways of making them better. And what really brought it about was the second half of the 19th century, the last half of the 1800s, 15 to 20% of infants were born didn't make it to their first birthday. So there was a high mortality for the infant rate. And a lot of the movement, the child welfare movement, believed that it was due not only to bad environment, but also due to unpasteurized milk. And so the child welfare movement was born. And it actually got a boost in 1908. A former school teacher, Mary DeGarmo, she organized what was the first scientific baby contest, later known as the Better Baby Contest, in Louisiana State Fair in Shreveport, Louisiana. With the help of pediatrician Dr. Jacob Bodenheimer, an evaluation was designed to compare measurements of the baby's height, weight, circumference of the head, chest and abdomen, and arms and legs. Also, mental acuity was measured with questions based on the measurement pioneers of Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, as well as the child study movement leader J. Stanley Hall. So they took these results from these women, and the idea was compare it to other babies of the same age. Here's where your baby stands. Are you in the 99th percentile? Are you in the 50th percentile? And help them realize what was wrong and ways that they could fix it, is what it began. And so these Better Baby contests, they actually continued on. There's pictures of contest winners up until 1940, which is the latest that I have. I'm sure there's more post 1940 up here. So besides that, when the contest took off, 2 years later in 1910, they shifted their focus not only from the actual child, but educating the mothers on the nutrition and how to teach them to raise their children, give them techniques. In Lawrence County, the first actually mentioning of the Better Baby program came in 1930 at the Tri-County Fair. In 1934, just demonstrations for canning baby food, making baby clothing, and play equipment were given. And by 1935, 19 Better Baby clubs had enrolled 39 babies. So for Lawrence County, it was a little bit later when it took off, but it was the 1930s is when it really came into effect. Members were given literature concerning prenatal care, proper feeding, and general care of the baby. At demonstration meetings, patterns for creating clothing that enabled toddlers to dress themselves in order to boost confidence were given, as well as plans for homemade toys and play equipment, suitable games, exercises, and hobbies were taught along with child development and ways of manner and general behavior. So you got to learn how to eat with a fork and knife. Not that they probably did it before, but you never know. So I really want to draw your attention to the picture in the middle of the woman holding the baby. That is Mrs. C.L. Carson and Marilyn Jean. And Mrs. Carson was a member of the Home Demonstration Club in Black Rock. And when Marilyn Jean was 8 years old, Miss Carson went to the meeting holding Marilyn Jean. And Neva Hill, who was the assistant agent, county agent at the time, she was leading the meeting and she noticed the malnutrition on Marilyn Jean. I guess she was just very skinny, very small. And she was so concerned that Ina Sitton, who was the county agent, and then the president of the Black Rock Club, they walked the 1.5 miles up the Rocky Hills back in Black Rock, back to their home. They brought tomato juice and they brought bulletins on how to help with baby nutrition. And they kept up with her and they gave her demonstration. And as she goes on to write in her annual report, Mrs. Carson was instructed in the use of the bulletins, and being a very intelligent woman, she has followed feeding instructions to the letter. Marilyn Joan is a year old in October. Her chest is well formed and her back is straight. She hasn't been ill a single day. So I haven't done too much research into eugenics, which actually came out of the Better Baby. Some people, there's a pro and a con. I'm not educated enough to say whether it was good or bad, but there were some good to the Better Baby program, I think. There were some good results coming out of it, at least just the awareness of, kids need to be fed and they need more food. So, how do you feed them? Well, you grow your own food. How you grow your own food? Well, let me tell you. And that was another aspect of the home demonstration clubs, and it was gardening. So each year, members were encouraged to plant new varieties of produce. They were taught how to do it. Some lists: in 1929, in Lawrence County, carrots, Swiss chard, and spinach were introduced. In 1930, rutabaga, salsify, Chinese cabbage, collards, kohlrabi, parsley, cauliflower, and okra. In 1936, New Zealand spinach. I don't know what that is, but I'd be interested to find out. So who'd have thought? But the home garden program, they taught families how to supplement their incomes, not only their nutrition, but their incomes too, because they would sell the surplus. That's where you see the truck patches started popping up, and the farmers' stands on the edge of the road actually was a big thing that came out of this program. In 1930, the Lawrence County, they entered the Arkansas Garden Contest, which was sponsored by the Chilean Nitrate of Soda Education Bureau, which was a public-private partnership. It increased the awareness of the benefits of fertilizer. This is why you want to put fertilizer on your garden. 47 women from 13 clubs entered. They grew both new and heirloom varieties. And agent Gladys Waters, she wrote of Mrs. Randolph Sharp from the Kaufman Club, who won. And she grew 11 new varieties, 6 of which found a reoccurring place in her garden. 2 kinds of vining beans were grown along the fence along with flowers to add to the attractiveness of her garden. When most gardens had stopped producing vegetables during July and August, and this is what was important, Mrs. Sharp was able to preserve 32 quarts of tomatoes. Overall, Mrs. Sharp showed the advantage of following the home demonstrations gardening program by earning $41.03 in produce sales, as well as giving friends and neighbors produce during the summer months. So that was a big thing, because usually when the gardens died out, people stopped eating the fresh food, and that's when you also started an uptake in the nutritional deficiency, vitamin deficiencies. So some more of the effects. By 1940, Of the roughly 2,800 farming families in Lawrence County, 2,600 were planting a garden. 1,500 of those, 2/3 of them were year-round gardens. So, it was working, it was moving. Mrs. John Presley of Powhatan, where my park is now, she wrote of her garden. She said, "My garden for 1940 was 88 feet wide and 154 feet long." So I don't know what's the measurements of this room?
It's about 50 long.
50 long and?
About 20.
So imagine 4 times wide and 3 times long, and that's the size of your garden. That's a big garden. And what it did is it not only did it provide ample food for my family of 4 throughout the summer months, as well as enough vegetables to can 400 quarts. My garden first means a healthy family. Second, means of providing a variety of food the year round. Third, it offers lots of pleasure and good invigorating exercise. And fourth, when company comes unexpected, you don't have such thoughts of, what will I feed them, while you are welcoming them in. So, provided some sense of security for knowing that you have food in your larder and it's okay. So this actually here is the beginning. This is, I think that's Mrs. Kaufman, or Mrs. Rudolph from the Kaufman. This is her before in the spring. And then at the end, you can barely see her face. She's surrounded by the vines and the beans. So, yeah. So it was really popular, and it still is a great program today. So with comes the fruit. Now you got to do something with it. Well, let's can it. Let's preserve it. Canning work began in Arkansas in 1912, a couple years before the first HTC. And again, with those 10 counties, with the $1,500 from the USDA, they created the canning clubs. And actually, Miss Elizabeth Jackson, she was assigned to Randolph County, which is the county just north of Arkansas where Pocahontas is located in. And she had over 400 girls enrolled in the first year. So there was definitely interest in it. The girls were responsible for growing 1/10 of an acre of tomatoes. They had to provide. They were given directions. excuse me, on how to cultivate, prune, and to stake the tomatoes. They were taught by the agents on how to grow them, and then after harvesting them, they preserved them. And the idea was to teach the girls a source of cash income, as well as an interesting occupation, and another way of providing food for the family. And throughout the whole process, they had to keep a record of everything that occurred, the amount of work, the time, money spent, and the amount of tomatoes processed. These girls became known as the CCC clubs, girl clubs, or CCC Girls of Arkansas, which is the County Canning Club of Arkansas. So these are I always thought that was really cool. I'd love to research more and find out more about them and where they all were. So for Lawrence County, again, we saw the 2 months of Katie Scott in 1918. But Odessa Pierce in 1924 was the one that really brought it in. She used pressure cookers and canners to help with the labor-saving idea of the technique. She brought that in. The higher temperature by cooking food under pressure shortened your process time by 25%. So, and it reduced the amount of wood, coal, oil, and kerosene. So you saved money on your fuel, you saved money on your time, and it also allowed a preservation of meat, which at its lower acidity, you couldn't preserve it at the open boil method, or just boil it where you see a lot of your vegetables done. The guys at MIT earlier in the 19th century found that out with oysters, and they're the ones that actually realized that cooking under pressure achieved the higher temperature to kill the needed bacteria. So the Richwoods Club had purchased a hotel-sized canner with 50 can capacity, put 50 cans in the canner at one time, and Mrs. Pierce instructed them. They produced 1,500 cans of vegetables, 30 cans of fruit, and 2 beeves, which beeves are whole cows. So the next year, they saw there was an installation of 6 steam canners and sealers in the county. So from Richwoods, it spread out into the rest of the county. It became really popular. That year, they processed and canned 6 head of cattle, distributing some of the meat to the county's justices of the peace in the hopes of ensuring continued financial support from the quorum court. So here's a little food, you know. What do you think about that home demonstration club? We really like our agent. And actually, another story, a side note, Lawrence County did go through a time where they actually had to fight for the money from the quorum court to get their agents for the women. And I have a letter that's in the front of that binder that actually is a letter to the county judge from the women. It's a petition. We want our agent back, and it's dated in 1929. So that's why they canned it that year, because they wanted their agent back. So food preservation continued to be a huge, important part of their part of the demonstration's goals, and a lot of it was because of the Depression. 1930, Lawrence County clubs turned out 26 beeves into 2,574 quarts, which sold for $1,287. So you can make money, 2.5 times more than if the cows were sold alive at market. So they cut out the middleman, they cut out the meat processing plant, and were able to pocket the money themselves. By 1940, Lawrence County clubs canned 63,991 quarts of fruit. This is just for the year of 1940. 68,957 quarts of vegetables, 7,688 quarts of meat, 12,163 quarts of preserves, 11,358 quarts of pickles and relishes, and 6,605 quarts of jelly, totaling 170,742 quarts valued at $28,818.22. A lot way from the 1,500 cans they did that first year. So it was really very popular. And in fact, it was so popular that a lot of the communities built canning kitchens. And this is where my interest came in, because over there is my jail from 1935 on the far right. And that's the oldest picture that actually we have of our jail. And what what happened was that the local members, if you didn't have your canning equipment, well, you can't do it. So they would get together, they would either build a canning kitchen or they would refurbish, as they did with my jail, a public building. And they did it in an easy place. The equipment was either provided locally, or they'd use the club dues, club money to provide it, to buy equipment. The first community kitchen was completed in Smithville in 1924, although this is actually in Bowdoin. If you've been up in Lawrence County, in Bowdoin's just north of Black Rock and Powhatan when you head up towards Mammoth Spring on 63. So I don't have a picture of Smithville's canning kitchen. I wish I did. But I've got in Bowdoin, Powhatan, and then later on, Powhatan, they built a county community center, and Extension Service Homes Demonstration Club Community Center. And it's right outside of Powhatan, and that's the picture on the bottom. It actually was built 2 years after they refurbished the jail. So Powhatan, they used 1935 Federal Emergency Relief Act, or FARA, which later became WPA money, Works Progress Administration money, to refurbish the old jail. And then they finished using the WPA money to build the community center you see down below. So clubs, they purchased the glass jars or the tin cans at wholesale prices, and the equipment was either from the family members' home stock or bought with club funds. So it was pretty neat. And families that used the kitchen, they brought some of their produce home, but they also paid for the use of the kitchen by donating some of their finished can that would go out to needy families. So that's how you paid for the use of that equipment. Another way that they affected the Home Demonstration Club affected nutrition was also in the poultry. And it was added to not only increase the variety to the diet, but also really for a supplemental income, to give women a way of earning money to help with the farm. By the 1930s, the crop prices, they fell due to infestation, but poultry remained more buoyant. 1933, the Progressive Farmer magazine stated that poultry was the only farm commodity selling above pre-war prices. So what's a good way to earn money? So here's something that's steady. We know it's not going to drop anytime soon. So throughout the country, women learned flock raising techniques, generating incomes that would lay the foundation for a poultry agribusiness boom that would come after World War II. I've heard rumors, I don't know if it's true, that maybe Tyson and some of the other big poultry businesses may have actually started out like this. I don't know the true story. I haven't researched it, but I've heard people sort of say, maybe it was his wife that started and he took over. I know that was true in some cases with the farms. The farmer would see that the wife was having such a successful business with the poultry that he would actually stop decrease on the crop so he could help increase the flock and help her out with it and that became the family business in some farms. So the introduction of artificially heated incubators or wooden hens and mechanical brooders took poultry out of the seasonal business and allowed the chicks to hatch and survive during the winter months. So that's why it was able to stay as successful as it did. So poultry came to Arkansas in 1913. Again, with the girls' clubs, they had 13 eggs. They were taught them how to hatch them, how to raise them, how to kill them, and how to preserve them. 1923 was the first year it appeared in Lawrence County. C.C. Randall, who was the extension agent at the time, he taught 2 poultry schools that resulted in 10 women raising 1,500 chickens for a total profit of $922. So there's money in them chickens. The meetings were led by both the county agent and the home demonstration agent too, to help learn how to caponize and listen. They gave lectures on chick care and getting broilers ready for market. So mechanical refrigeration during this time came about and actually allowed to lengthen the shelf life of eggs. And railroad cars were designed to keep hundreds of chickens cool, which allowed rural produce to make it into the cities before going bad. And so that also increased the demand. You had that supply and demand. So a lot of these women, they would send their chickens, they'd send the chickens into the city, but they would sell their eggs locally. So it was a good, that's one of the things that helped it. 1929, Mrs. Stratton's English Leghorns laid an average of 201 eggs per hen. I don't know if anyone has any chickens, but that's a lot of chicken. That's a lot of eggs. So it's one a day. How much does your get?
Mine laid one a day for about 2 years,
and then they'll slow down. So you get about 300 eggs out of them.
Yeah, more than that, double that, because they lay for 2 years. But this is a different breed than they.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine not leggers.
Yeah.
Hybridized a little.
Yeah, and this is also
They're
70 years afterwards. Yeah, where we've gone through. So by 1936, the demonstration agent writes of Mrs. Ed Bilbrey's, and she, I think, her chickens, I think, are in the middle picture. And she says that Mrs. Bilbrey's records show that she averaged 500 chicks a year. From October 1st, 1935 to June 15th, she sold them. 175 hens averaged 120 eggs, which is 14 above average standard for these months. The value of the egg was $384.39, and the feed bought cost $131.46, and the corn was raised at home. So $380 minus 130, you're still making $250 worth of profit? I think it could be worth it. She keeps her hen a second year, and so in June she discards the hens, culls the pullets, sells the culls, and begins pushing the remainder. She has found that this to be more profitable than keeping them the second year and accepting a lowered production. So she pretty much keeps them to their height and then kicks them out as their projection is heading down. So these women actually were really smart and really business oriented. You can see why some of these farmers were probably looking at them going, we're making more money this way. I think if I just stop with the cattle and help with the chickens, we may be a little bit better. So they used new innovations, adopted methods of improving housing, feeding, breeding, and took advantage of the expanding markets, the shrinking of the country between the rural and the urban markets to really make an effect. So in conclusion, what started as a national solution for the agricultural depression after the flush years of World War I turned into several decades of education and lifestyle improvements for rural farm families. By 1940, Home Demonstration Service had worked in Arkansas for 17 years. They went through 9 demonstration agents who used their skills to produce healthier lifestyles and supplemental incomes. World War II shifted the focus of the home demonstration movement, but by using the Great Depression home skills, club members provided items to augment or supplement rationed food items to keep the balanced diets for their families. So when the rationing came along again, granted they didn't use the tin for their canning, they went to the scrap drives, but they were able to use what they learned during the Great Depression to help keep their families healthy with the nutrition and the food that they grew. They saved their seeds. They were able to keep going. The legacy continued on after 1945 during the post-war boom because communities felt the education, practices, and social opportunities were too important to stop even when they were no longer needed. And that's why the Home Demonstration Club evolved into the extension makers, the home extension, EHC, extension homemakers, excuse me. You kept seeing it, and I think you're starting to see a comeback today, again, because we're seeing it. So, and this is one of my favorite things. The effects of the home demonstration, it was so significant. This is a quote from a reporter that was written in 1936, but it still rings true today. And what he says is, what impresses you in the whole movement is this: tens of thousands of farm women have caught a vision of a richer, more satisfying life for their families and themselves. They want their children to grow up vigorous and well prepared for the tussles required to win even a moderate success. They want pleasant homes and a fair measure of the social and cultural joys that are the recompense for toiling and striving, and they are determined to have these things. So I still think that rings through in a lot today. So these are pictures that you see up here. These are the pictures of the clubs from 1935. Powhatan's is the one down at the bottom middle. I think one person in there is Ida Bell Flippo, and she was actually a mover and a shaker in our town, and she's got a whole interesting life story herself. So, does anybody have any questions for me about the Home Demonstration Club? Again, you're welcome to come up and look at the copies of the reports.
Kristyn, I don't have a question,
Yeah.
but a comment.
Yeah.
You talk about them teaching them to eat with knife and fork instead of, they probably were before. They need to do it again. I'll tell you why. My daughter, we took some friends of hers and went on a little trip. This is when she was in high school,
Uh-huh.
15 years ago. And we actually had a young lady who did not know how to use a knife and fork.
Really?
Cracker Barrel and had to teach her how to
Wow. I mean, I admit that comment was sort of made as a joke. I don't know if they actually did teach him that, but that's
Yeah.
wow.
There are people, apparently the child ate fast food all the time.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's a very common thing. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why this type of programming is gaining ground again, because it's going back to your roots. You see the boxes, the box dinners that you can call up, and you'll have all these fresh ingredients, and then they give you the directions on how to cook. Your kids don't know how to cook. They don't, and the idea of I know the one vegetable palette that they were complaining about, cream corn. I know people that all they know is corn because it's on the buffet, or mashed potatoes, or these high carbohydrate rich foods, but that's because they're cheap and they're easy and it's what we can afford. But that's why these programs are starting to come back, and you're starting to see that come around again. And I just find it really interesting, the more research that I do in not only the home demonstration clubs, but the extension service, and what they were teaching in 1930, you see it come round robin about every 30 years. The whole crop rotation thing, that was big in the 30s. Well, it became big again when rice came to the fore in the 60s and 70s. Well, now it's coming again. Now we're getting peanuts in Lawrence County. This whole idea of if we rotate our crops, we get healthy soil. It's like new. Well, no. But it's very interesting research, and I'm still going on and still learning more and delving into it. So, anything else? No? Well, I appreciate your time, and again, come on up and anything else.